Hello, I'm Mischievous Marcinacchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, Amazing Fantasy number 15, and of course, all of the Amazing Spider-Man annuals, which despite owning them, I say do not count.
And I'm Dapper Dan Gavosden, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which I say definitely count, even though that claim diminishes year after year. But for me, Amazing Fantasy 15 remains a fantasy. And Mark, I added that addendum on about the annuals because this week I'm finally playing catch up on all of the comics that have been building up since my move. And I've been slowly working through them, and I finally hit that Amazing Spider-Man annual from this year. And man, it wasn't bad, but it was not really taking advantage of that format. What do you think about these whole, like, the past few years we've been getting these, like, 12-part stories told across annuals? Like, is anybody buying all of these? Like, it must be working.
Well, no, I mean, they did that in the 90s, too. I still remember, like, Atlantis Attacks, and, I think, like everything in annuals, any excuse they can come up with to try and get suckers like you to buy them and say they count, they're going to do it. Whereas like a sucker like me buys it even though it doesn't count. So who's the real sucker? I guess that's the bottom line.
Wait, was the Atlantis Attacks the one that had Steve Ditko in the back of it? Like his return to Amazing Spider-Man?
No, that was the Speedball issue, I believe. No, Atlantis Attacks was Rob Liefeld's one and only Amazing Spider-Man work.
That's the thing that's significant about it.
Yes.
Put that one in the record books.
Yeah, for the annals of history, for sure. Anyway, with that said, welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of Spider-Man comic universe and maybe poorly drawn feet. Thanks for joining us for this review episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, if you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review to help spread the word about our show. And another addendum here, if your favorite podcast app is Apple Podcasts, make sure you're keeping up with it because the subscription does not work in the same way. It does not update you all the time when new things come out. So just flag that one for yourself there.
This podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members. So if you want to receive early episodes, exclusive artwork, and keep this podcast going, go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and consider joining our Patreon.
Yeah, Mark, and our patrons are about to get an awesome package in the mail. I'm sending out some artwork this week for all of them. And thank you for being patient, everybody. We've got an awesome piece from Juan Ferreira of Craven Victorious on top of Spider-Man's grave. I think this is an all-timer, and our patrons, I think, are going to be shouting it out once they get it in the mail. So everybody who already supports us, keep your eyes out for that. And if you don't yet support us, just another reason to dive in and help us do what we're doing. Speaking of which, today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 56, also known as Legacy Issue 950, which means it's got a $7.99 price tag on it. It's another one of these meaty issues. We'll discuss all of that in a moment. This issue was written by Zeb Wells. The cover features artwork by John Romita Jr., Scott Hanna, and Marcio Menyz. The interior pages feature pencils by John Romita Jr., inks by Scott Hanna, colors by Marcio Menyz, and of course letters by VC's Joe Caramagna. The backup stories in this issue were made by Zeb Wells, Andreas Genolet, Rachelle Rosenberg, Joe Caramagna, Ramon Rosanas, and Lee Gatlin. Boy, I've fallen into your camp here, Mark, of butchering these names.
You kind of sound like a newscaster when they say their own name and there's like an ethnic flair to it. It's like, Andres Genolet. Like, oh, okay, we're going there with it. I
made him
right.
French. He may not be, but
yes.
I made that executive decision. Okay, this issue was first released on August 28th, 2024. Going off of prevailing sentiment that I've seen online, that is not currently obsessed with that Paul backup story. which we'll definitely talk about. Like, all I've seen is praise about this particular issue of the comic, especially falling, on the back of the previous issue, 55. Like, it feels like, like this book is doing what people wanted it to have been doing all this time. And I'm going to sound like a broken record here, which is to say, Zeb Wells can write a great issue of Amazing Spider-Man. And I'm going to sound like a broken record again when I say, why can't we get this all the time? And, I have my own ideas about this. And boy, have you and I bandied some thoughts around over the past couple of years talking about this very concept. But boy, when you read an issue like this, I'll just say it outright. I think this may be the best issue of the run. For me, it's certainly up there. But to me, it's like, if it's not the best issue of the run, this is the most like solid Spider-Man story that I've read. It feels so uniquely what you read Amazing Spider-Man for, and even then dressed up a little bit. Like, it's just a really nice, solid issue of Amazing Spider-Man with all of the distinguishing characteristics that have made this book stand out. And when we've complained many times over the past years that this book has been lacking all of those elements, when you see them here, it's like so hard to figure out how this person can do both those things or miss so wildly when he hits so hard here. What did you think of this issue and the question that I'm posing?
Well, I feel like, if this was an issue 1 to a run, we'd be calling this like a really good back to basics kind of issue, because that's really, in its own weird way, what it is, despite the fact that it kind of obsesses with this idea of loose ends, which is, I think kind of the meta commentary, and we'll get into that in a little bit, about this being the end of Zeb Wells' run and this is his final arc, but I call it a back to basics because, like, we're very much in Peter's head. This book is driven 100% by Peter and what he needs to do in a certain situation. And we've gotten glimpses of this throughout this run. Certainly the very, very first arc with Tombstone. And frankly, I thought the beginning of Gang War was very inside Peter's head, even with some of the mystery angles going on during that run. But frankly, we really have not been getting a lot of Peter over the duration of this run, and we are subject to speculate why that's the case. But I think being so inside of his head and kind of checking in on all the cast, and it really was like, in its own way, as a finale to a run, it was also kind of just like resetting everything up again in a way an issue 1 would. And I think that's kind of why we liked it, and why we think this is a strong example of a Spider-Man story. It's almost like when you cut through all of the nonsense and the major crossovers, or like these big epic arcs, and just tell a story about Peter, it's successful. And go figure, we've been only doing this for 60 plus years, and yet people still think that they can kind of change the formula, or maybe they don't think they can change the formula, but they want to change the formula for some reason. And at the end of the day, this is what works. So, we're going to give it good reviews, or say we like it more than its predecessors. And it's pretty easy for us to kind of spot why, because these are very, I think, obvious elements of a Spider-Man story that are being highlighted.
Yeah, I mean, I won't credit or discredit how hard it probably is to do all of this. A good Spider-Man story makes it look easy because the characters are just being themselves, But,
right.
Of a lot of Marvel's characters, I do think writing Spider-Man is probably amongst the hardest gigs to have. And not just because of the schedule or the requirements for the line, which I think add extra difficulty on it, but just because what makes Spider-Man special is so specific. It's either working or it's not. And over the years, it has found its groove or it has not found its groove. But there are like any character, there are way more bad stories than there are good ones. And so like a writer, having a handful of like really good stories is probably about as much as you can ask for a run. Of Amazing Spider-Man, and some have better hit records than others, and some decades have better hit records than others. But it just seems so stark to me, like when Zeb does an issue like this, it does feel so simple and effortless for him. Like the character is very clearly presented and recognizable, and so it just really stands in stark relief. And I could theorize all day why it is, but this issue maybe, at least for me, kind of clicked in place that like this feels like the end of a healing journey for Peter, that like he was so hurt by losing MJ that he left Peter aside to fall into the world of Spider-Man. But this issue, and I guess the one we talked about like last week, feel like Peter kind of landing somewhere and allowing that part of himself to come back out again, and even like factor into how he Spider-Mans. This issue very much leverages the life of Peter into his superheroics, but doesn't really mix the two up in a way of like losing himself in either. And I think that's great. I just think like if that was the goal, if we've not been getting this kind of story the whole time because Zeb Wells wanted to show us what it meant for him to leave Peter behind, I would consider that arc a failure, even if I love this particular issue, because I never got whether it's lip service or work being done to sell us on losing this part. So frankly, by the time I'm reading this, I'm just thinking to myself, thank God we're back here. Like, because this is just what I wanted the whole time.
I feel like you're like reverse no-prizing yourself, like kind of like creating a reason why we didn't get this in the first place, but then also saying, but that still doesn't make an excuse for it. So
but I mean, I think there was some lip service to that was the story of this arc, and even in the letters pages, when people write in about how much they're not liking the book, Nick Lowe will respond and say like, we wanted to do a run where we see what it's like for Peter to like fall into Spider-Man. And it's like, okay, cool, but like that's not really what you've been writing about. Like
no,
not on the surface at least.
Yeah. Again, we can kind of dissect this till until we're blue in the face. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I mean, I agree with you in that, there is obviously a very specific challenge to writing Spider-Man and writing Peter, but at the same time, and granted I am incredibly biased, but like why anyone working on Amazing Spider-Man would never want to tell a book that is like central about Peter and Peter alone, kind of like shocks me. It's just like he's like one of the best characters in comic books, and it's like you get your opportunity to tell a story with him, why wouldn't you just like run with that? But alas. But
especially when you can do this good of a job of it.
Right. But let's talk a little bit. I alluded to it earlier in when you asked me about my thoughts on this. This whole loose ends bang. I wouldn't even call it a theme. It was kind of a drum banging throughout this issue. Like loose ends. Like it's clearly a very open acknowledgement by Zeb and the Spider team here that Zeb's run is ending in a few issues, and as we've talked about before, this is now I guess we would consider this our fourth creative team transition, if you consider Beyond a separate creative team, which I do. It's that putting the toys back in the box routine, and this story definitely seems to be setting us up to be putting the toys back in the box, or if we're throwing the toys out of the garbage, they're going to be pretty definitive about throwing those toys out.
No,
What are your
I
thoughts?
completely agree. We're wrapping up stories here. There's several stories here that feel like they came to an end. Whether they continue or not, is yet to be seen. But like even in the backups, I felt like there were like elements that I would say both stories we got in the backups were ways of closing off stories. But like, I actually kind of feel like Zeb Wells is protesting a little too much about the loose ends thing, because the whole Tombstone story to me feels like a very natural evolution of what came before, rather than a manufactured, I've got to put these away. Like, this is the story I think we've wanted since the run began, which is to say, like, how is Spider-Man going to address the growing rise of Tombstone's criminality and their ongoing relationship? And to that end, I'm very excited about the story because we've wanted it since issue 6.
Right, and I would add to that, the other major storyline that we seem to be getting, closure on is, well, storylines is both, the Robertsons versus the Lincolns, and then more specifically Janice versus Tombstone. I think those are like the kind of the that's the triumvirate of storylines that have been kind of running throughout the duration of this arc. I mean, I know Randy technically started dating Janice during the Nick Spencer run, right? Am I
Yes,
misremembering
correct,
that? Yeah. But it's still, it's like, we kind of got the closure of the Norman Sins arc, I guess. Maybe. They seem to think it is. But the thing is, and I'm glad you mentioned like the protesting. What I wanted to ask you about, and look, like, hey, we're in 2024, and we tell ongoing narrative stories much differently than we do 20, 25, 30 years ago. But at the same time, like, it just the open acknowledgement of the quote unquote loose ends, it just felt so extraordinarily on the nose for me that I got to admit, it did take me out of this book a little bit, which is maybe part of the reason why I'm not that I'm jumping ahead, but I have a feeling we're going to have a little bit of a disparity on a grade here based on your opening comments, because there was just some things in this story that I'm just like, okay, we're being a little too cute here about it, because I'm like, like you can, as we talked about, put the toys back in the box or tie up your loose ends and all that without, like, I think being like the sledgehammer applaud about it in the context of the book. I don't understand why we need to be metatextual about something like this. It's like, to me, it's just like, tell your story. It's not a loose end. Like you said, it's the evolution of the story. Like, now Spider-Man has to deal with, like, we kind of forgot about Tombstone because it was the edict of editorial that we tell a different arc following Gang War. But the fact of the matter is, at the end of Gang War, we had this major status quo shift involving Tombstone and also him betraying Janice. So it was like, obviously we need to know what happens next there. Why would we end that story there? So, like, this is not a loose end. This is just an ongoing of a story. And I think kind of pointing it out over and over again was I think Zeb being a little too cute and meta and of the 21st century, and I didn't love it. I got to be honest with you.
Yeah, I do think it's a bit on the nose. I don't know that it bothered me quite in the same way as it seems to have you. I think there's a sort of like, after issue 55 of seeing Peter kind of stand up for himself. I feel like the acknowledgement of the loose ends feels kind of like I'm shaking myself out of my depressive state. What kind of stuff from that period of my life, should I go back and address and bring to a close? Like, if I don't know if that's technically a no prizing it, but like, to me, I know it's the end of the run, but like, it does feel like there is some change, and partially that is brought about by the sort of like mirror imagery of this particular issue that mirrors so strongly the first arc. I mean, there's a number of elements that come back, but like, even just Peter meeting Tombstone in the limousine and the kind of like how different his attitude is about all of this stuff and how he goes about solving the tombstone problem feels different to me. Like it's someone who is trying to like solve problems that they didn't know how to solve in their life before. You know, like maybe he got cognitive behavioral therapy. I don't know what it is, you know, but like this Peter in this story feels like he has tools to work with that he didn't before. And so that's kind of like what's facilitating this whole discussion in his mind about loose ends. Maybe I'm overreading it, but like that's why it kind of like worked for me on a narrative level rather than just a metatextual level, which it certainly is. I mean, it is, you know, a really like going out of its way to like wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and I could see why that would bother you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I get what you're saying. I mean, you know, you also talked about, you know, obviously reading like the letters pages and how, you know, I got to be honest, I don't read the letters pages, so I miss a lot of your letters, and you know, like I frankly think if that has to be required reading to understand what the text is saying, then you know that's a failure on the part of the creative team in terms of how they're telling the story, because like you know, we could talk about like, you know, whatever the epiphany or the smelling salts were for Peter to kind of come back to himself. But like, I don't really think the text of the comic itself has earned that in any kind of way. So to me, it really, you know, I do feel it's just kind of being on the nose about it and trying to point out like, oh, hey, you know, we want to resolve our stories now, whether it be because Zeb is leaving the book or just because, you know, they're basically, you know, making a show of the fact that like we're resolving a story, or at least we think they are. I mean, that's the next thing, and you know, we don't have to talk about it in this segment per se, but like, you know, we have been here before, Dan, where it seems like, all right, we're set up for things to go in a sensible direction, and then it's like all of a sudden it's like, oh wait, you know, you're telling me that this very personal gang war is going to be a story about Madame Mask? Okay.
Yeah,
know,
right.
so...
No, I mean this could be the gang war first strike of this story, which is to say a very personal, well-written issue of Amazing Spider-Man followed by something that's deeply not interested in Peter Parker. And the characters of his world. I definitely, I hear you, Mark, on what you're saying. I definitely want to get into where I think some of the evidence for Peter's growth appears in this comic, but I will get into, I will say sausage making wise, that's going to come after our break. I did want to point out a couple of other kind of like fun mirrors to like the first arc that I thought were clever in this. If only because I have nowhere else in our formatted review to talk about this, is that like I loved the opening with the lion and how it closes. Yes, it may be very on the nose. It's a lion eating its own cub kind of thing. But like I appreciate when an issue of a story feels complete. And even if it's just a kind of cheap like symbolic narrative cheat that allows you to create a bookend. You know, this felt like, is it a one shot? No, but it felt like a significant chapter by having those bookends there. And it even had it's a call back to the first story where John Romita Jr. drew that lion on the wall of Tombstone's home before it burned down. And it's like, okay, like why was that imagery so significant to him? And then I also thought it was really funny when he's like on top of Kareem and White Rabbit's car, and they're joking like, how does he always know where we are? And you see the spider tracer there. But if you go back, I think it's to like issue 2 or 3, he places that spider tracer on the top of their car. So like it rewards people that remember those little details. And I only remembered that because I went back and read World Without Love this week because I wanted to kind of feel the arc of what was going on here. And I was like, oh, okay, they planted that all the way back then. I
mean, it's almost like a well-placed lookout, right, Dan?
Exactly.
I mean, you know.
Except this one paid off. Okay.
There you go.
And then just for in terms of like putting things back in the box, I thought the bugle scene was really funny where like he's got this like warm welcome from Robbie and no one else there has the time to care about Peter's crap, you know?
Right.
And to me, that's a way of saying like, you know, it's really on the next guy to figure out what Peter is going to do for work. You know, I hinted that there could be a return to the Bugle, but feel free to take it in whatever direction you want. And frankly, any time spent in the Bugle is good time as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. Do we want to plug the Slack, Dan?
Plug away, Mark.
Well, of course, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more. Dan, what do we have happening in the Slack this week?
Well, Mark, I'm not the only one that is going back and looking back through the Zeb Wells run. A number of members of our Slack are going back and rereading the whole thing to see like how it lands when you can read it kind of straight through. And I think people are kind of coming around a little bit more on some of the elements of it. I don't think that that's any kind of like mea culpa. I mean, I think how you read it week to week is the way to judge something, you know, in the way that we talk about it. But like, it has been fun remembering some of the like highlights of the run and maybe poking fun at the low parts of it. So that's been fun to see in the Slack. And I've also been going off on something in the Slack, and I'm remiss to bring this up, but do you know the podcast YouTube channel Comic Pop, Mark?
Yeah, I don't watch it religiously, but I'm aware of it.
Yeah, they're nice guys over there, but they had this like clip go viral this week, and it just really bugged the hell out of me because it's like, I think it was something like why like reading Spider-Man is so difficult now, or something like that, or why it's so hard to read Spider-Man now, and they basically like go on this one more day rant, which is fine. Like, I'm not going to stop anybody from doing that. But then they make all these like presuppositions about like it's only like they can't do Peter Parker stories now, and he can't be in events because of Sony, and they have access to Spider-Man stuff if they make him involved. And to me, it was a bunch of nonsense of people kind of talking like out of their butts about what they think is going on in the Spider office. And I know I make claims all the time like about what I think is going on, but I won't claim to have certainty about it. And so anyway, the only reason I bring this up is like it really made me thankful for having our show and the Slack for people that like are really big fans and reading it to have like normal conversations about like what's actually going on in the pages of this comic, whereas the rest of the internet is just, I think, a lot of people who aren't reading the book mouthing off about it. And so the Slack remains to me a special place. And that's why I wanted to bring it up. So anyway, if you want to jump into the Slack and join in on the conversation, there's a link to there's a link in the description of this episode that'll let you sign up in less than a minute and join in on the conversation.
All right, Dan, well said. Well, why don't we get back to our review here, and let's talk a little bit about Tombstone here. Obviously, I mean, I feel like Tombstone, as you know, as we mentioned earlier in this episode, has kind of been the common thread that has tied this arc together. This kind of ascent of Tombstone into, you know, from storytelling standpoint, a major criminal force in Marvel. But, you know, I would think from a broader metatextual standpoint, kind of, you know, he's really escalated as a top rogue for Spider-Man. I kind of view him, you know, I feel like, you know, Wilson Fisk is kind of being, you know, less and less of an influence in this book. So he's kind of like the main street level antagonist for Spider-Man now. And so what was your thoughts on Tombstone in this issue, but also just kind of overall how he's kind of risen in the ranks in Spider-Man's world here?
I mean, I think short of Jerry Conway, Wells is maybe the best writer we've gotten on Tombstone, maybe ever, and has done so much to elevate this character, if only by consistent characterization and really making like all the choices he has to make very at the forefront of this book. I really feel like I get this guy and what's going on with him. Now, a lot of that is, thanks to Nick Spencer and the work that he did to kind of like find a natural way to reintegrate those worlds and make them more personal than they have been in the past. And I think like everything done with him has been really neat. I am very fearful for Tombstone because of that opening with the lion, because all the focus right now is on the lion eating the cub or Tombstone going after Janice. But let's not forget how that metaphor, if you will, concludes, which is Kingpin saying, let me show that lion real power as he gets a rifle out to bring it down. So, I'm not leaving, open the possibility that Tombstone is, potentially, in the path of something even greater than himself. But, and I guess he kind of falls on his own sword in this particular issue. But yeah, I really dug this issue, and it threw a lot of like twists and turns at me. Like I thought like this issue generally was really well paced and had great page turns. But the one I think about a lot is the image of Tombstone with like his kind of gang members, and he's got the pictures of Peter Parker on the table. And, I read that and I thought, okay, well, where is this going? Like, we know that he knows who Peter is, but he doesn't know that Peter is Spider-Man. What's it going to happen? And I thought the scene in the car, not only because I think the characterization of Peter has been very fun in both limo scenes where Peter just is kind of snarky and like somehow tough enough to stand up to Tombstone in the way that Zeb Wells writes him. But like that turn where he says, oh, I'm sorry, it's not personal, but I have to like kill you in a messy way, Yeah. I thought that was a great twist. How did that read on the page to you?
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I agree. It was, I was definitely kind of reading through that section wondering like, where are they going with this? And similar again to that very first arc. I mean, like there's so many parallels in terms of how this story is being told in that first, and World Without Love is being told. And with obvious distinctions in terms of Peter's general morale, I would say. But like, I do love this like this chess game that seems to be evolving between the two characters. We saw it in the first arc with like setting up the fight and him busting up the Rose's gang and all that, and then them kind of revisiting it here and being like, okay, well, who's fooling who? I think is even like one of Peter's lines at one point. I do feel the physical fight, while very engaging and very entertaining, it did lack a little bit of the rawness of that first arc fight, where like the blood is kind of seeping through the mask.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And like I mean, it's different circumstances. I understand that. I'm not gonna like say like all fights have to be like that one, but like I think if I'm like ranking the Spider-Man Tombstone confrontations from this run, I think I was more riveted by that first one than this one. But this was still a very good moment. I mean, like we've seen this many times over the years. Like this kind of like Peter is in his civilian attire and he's getting beaten on, and it's like, well, I can punch back a little, but I can only punch back so much without exposing myself. It's such a classic little, Spider-Man, situation to be in, and but like I don't think I've ever seen it done in a way where the threat was that real. Like usually it's just kind of like, oh, I'm in the Daily Bugle, and I'm gonna stand up to this guy and take a punch, but like it's not gonna kill me, kind of a thing. Or this one, it was like, oh, I've never actually seen him have to kind of fake his way through a situation where he could have died. He could have died with Spider-Man. So it certainly is Peter if he's pulling back. So it was a good twist to that.
Well, that's what I liked about the scene is like the setup is right that he gives the card to Randy. And we know that Peter is Spider-Man and Tombstone doesn't, but we don't know what's on that card, but there is that sort of like trickery of the audience, which is to say, like, he's like, yeah, it's Spider-Man on the card, and I love the reveal of him being like, actually it wasn't Spider-Man, because like at that point I was like, I don't know how he's going to get out of this, obviously he's going to get out of it, but as the reader, I had never really been. I don't feel like I've been that kind of caught. That like I've seen Peter caught that naked in quite a while, where it feels like he's truly unprepared for what's coming at him. And speaking of the classic trope of like I can't punch back hard, I don't even know if we've seen that in the past decade. Like that was a very like Stan Lee like ism. I can't remember the last time we saw like. Can't punch too hard. They'll know I'm Spider-Man. And I thought the justification of it was good here too, which is to say, like, if Tombstone knows that I'm Spider-Man, he's going to come after the people I care about, which feels like a very like honest and real threat, given Tombstone's state of mind in this. But earlier I was referring to like what are some of the tools that Peter has that are like new in his belt, and I feel like the appearance of Luke Cage and She-Hulk is more than just like a get me out of a bind. It's kind of a moment where Peter has kind of like allowed himself to trust in his allies again. The first arc in World Without Love, it goes to like great lengths to show how at odds he is with the rest of the superhero community. And in a way, I'm not going to say this redeemed gang war for me, but it like showed me like what a takeaway of gang war could be, is that like Peter being a part of a team there, that was part of a healing journey for him too, enough that like he's not at it alone. Like the Peter in World Without Love is like, he's cocky in the face of Tombstone because he truly doesn't care anymore. Like he's lost everything. And so why not be an asshole to Tombstone in his limousine? Like what else does he have to lose? But here he's got something to lose. He just knows he has more support to back him up in the end. And I found that at least a significant like narrative, even if it doesn't spell it out, like that was my takeaway, was like he's learned to rely on other people in part of his healing process. Am I reading too much into this, or?
I mean, maybe.
That's fair. You can say yes, Mark.
I mean, look. I mean, like, I think it's good that Peter had a plan.
Yeah.
Obviously, like you said, I mean, like the whole, if Peter's plan was really like Randy calls Spider-Man, if I get into trouble, like that wouldn't have made sense. So there had to be an actual plan B here, and I think like the continuation of this, and obviously, Luke. You have Luke Cage because he's the mayor, and and then you have She-Hulk because she's the attorney. So like based on where the story was going next, it was a very reasonable evolution. I mean, technically, Peter's friends showed up for him at the end of the Dead Languages arc. You know what I mean? Like they all gathered in mourning around longstanding supporting cast member Miss Marvel. The thing is, like, we always talk about like is Spider-Man a loner? Is he not? Whatever. I mean, like obviously. Marvel is a connected universe. It always has been. So it's good to kind of see this connective tissue. I appreciated the reveal of Peter outsmarting Tombstone more than like maybe the message of because of how he's evolved from a morale standpoint, he can rely on his friends again. Like I think I respected the twist of narratively more than maybe the subtext behind it.
I think that's completely fair, and I think I agree too. I think I like that twist, but I will say I also really liked that Peter got the final punch in.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Oh yeah. which is something that, frankly, we have not been seeing over the duration of this run. It's like, would it just been like She-Hulk and Luke Cage's victory? So I do want to talk a little bit about the courtroom stuff. Both the twist with Janice being kind of revealed as the state's attorney's witness, and just the premise itself, because like I am of two minds of this. It's like, okay, it's obviously setting up some interesting drama, which is what you want to see in a story. So like I don't want to like poo poo the idea of good narrative drama. With that said, this is like whenever there's a twist like this in any kind of narrative fiction that kind of comes out of nowhere, it kind of reminds me of Scott Evil and Austin Powers, where it's just like, just take the gun and shoot him, and it's like, like how many guys could Spider-Man just like send to jail, like get a court case for, like like it's almost like, why can't he always just call the mayor and get them to arrest the bad guy? You know what I mean? Like it was a little bit like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess. Like like is this going to be the end of Tombstone? I don't think it will be. I think that there will be many twists and turns along the way from a legal standpoint, but it just like it just was ever so slightly far-fetched to me that like like after all these years, Spider-Man is like, no, the way to really resolve an issue is jurisprudence, man. Like it's like I just it kind of took me a moment. So that's the first part of it, and then and I'll let you talk in a second, Dan. I know I'm sure you got
no, go ahead.
This, but like the second part of it is, and this kind of comes back to what I was saying earlier with the like you got to kind of hold your breath with these stories in terms of where the focus is going to be, because like I feel like the ending sets up the resolution between Janice and Lonnie in Tombstone that we didn't really get in Gang War, which makes me concerned because, again, like Gang War started as this super personal story, and then it was just like it turned into this other thing, and I'm like, are we going to get, the end of the Lincoln saga out of this like Spider-Man story, and I just, it was just a red flag for me, is all I'm trying to say, is like, like this has the potential to be really interesting and compelling, or it has interesting to become such a time suck from a narrative standpoint that we're going to be sitting there in 4 issues being like, here they go again, like they just not telling a Spider-Man story. So I just want to put that out there now in issue 56. So if things turn in a not so great way, not that I could say I told you so, but I could just be like, well, it was a red flag for me.
Yeah, fair enough. I think what's still working for me at this point is that like even Janice's inclusion here is Peter driven, right? Like, yes, Robbie pulls Peter in and says like, hey, can you check up on this? And we see Spider-Man confront Janice, and then Peter get confronted by Randy, who says like, why did Spider-Man put her in jail, right? And we don't know the context. We think, oh, he must have gone and roughed her up or turned her over to the police. But I think what seems to really have happened there is that Spidey kind of gave her no options. It was like, you're going to jail one way or the other. Like, let's strike you a good deal, And I guess we'll find that stuff out. But it still feels like Peter is the one pulling the strings on this, and if we get characters coming together and Peter is the one that facilitated that, like that feels like more personal than like adventures that don't really involve Peter at this point. And you know what? I'm in it just for the face that Peter makes when Tombstone turns around and looks at him in the courtroom. Like that, like eating shit grin, or whatever. It's like was so wonderful to see. But yeah, I mean, this could turn into a fairly rote court drama. I don't think it's going to. I think this is going to still be a Spider-Man book with punchy, and all of that stuff. But we'll
no,
see.
No, sir, you're out of order. No.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see where it goes. I think we've got the next issue's cover is teased in the back of this, with like Spider-Man talking to Tombstone in jail, and I think that has a lot of like promise to it. So I don't know. I'm at the very least excited by like maybe this going in a new direction. You're right. Spider-Man relying on like jurisprudence and the law is a hard swing, and it brings up the whole like, didn't we just send this guy to the raft? How is he out again for Spider-Man to fight? I mean, to me at least, there's a certain level of like comic books about this where it's like, okay, he's interested in telling the story, and if I think too hard about this, like, is it really best for Spider-Man to pin these guys up in webs with a note and no evidence of their crimes? It's not. And few stories tap into this. The one I return to is the joke from the brand new, or was it Brand New Day, where Christos Gage came on and did that Avengers Academy story, and one of the kids asked Peter, like, you know, couldn't you like, you know, do more with like than just punching guys to actually help the people in the city? And Peter's like, don't ever bring that up again, you know. And it's like, okay, there's a certain amount of like Bruce Wayne would be better off like donating all his money to save the people of Gotham than fighting people as a, you know, as a bat
vigilante.
And Sauron just wants to turn people into dinosaurs, and that's comics. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I don't want to cure cancer. I want to turn people into dinosaurs.
Right, exactly.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, no, I'm not truly dinging the book for it, but like it just kind of like was like, oh, okay.
I think it's a completely fair point to bring up. Just pushing back a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. Why don't we talk a little bit about the backups before we get into our grades here? I mean, the first backup was I thought like very harmless. I mean, first we have Rhino on a date. I guess, you know, we are ignoring the story of Rhino being, you know, devastated by the fact that, you know, his return to villainy killed his former love. But okay, whatever. You know, he's on a dating app. You know, like let's celebrate love where we can.
Totally harmless. Got a good laugh out of me. Even if I do like Oksana as a character, I do really love and like to keep in my own headcanon.
Yeah, but I do like, you know, in a non like keep spelling out loose ends kind of a way. We did get resolution to the Ned Leeds Hobgoblin story. You know, like, you know, we had that whole storyline of like Peter and Betty trying to get the Winkler device. I got to do it, Dan. I can't, you know, it's like a reflex now. So it was good to kind of see that get paid off and see Ned get his I guess happy ending, although he's still like, you know, is an ass to Peter about it. So,
never change, Ned. Never change. Yeah.
Never change. So like I thought that was a totally effective. Oh, and I should note all of these backups, right, were written by Zeb Wells, or the main backups were written by Zeb Wells, which I think is an interesting little twist. What did you think about that?
I mean, I prefer it. Honestly, it feels much more cohesive to the story that we're getting rather than advertisements for other B titles, you know, and maybe it's because the run is ending and they don't really want to like spend that time launching other stuff. But like, it feels like it belongs in Amazing Spider-Man rather than getting like a Spider-Man 2099 or a Spider-Gwen story that doesn't really belong there.
On the flip side, if you're gonna like make another Web of Spider-Man for $10 and have a bunch of 3-page stories hyping other books, I might have to take a pass. I mean, I think from a sheer economic standpoint, I was like, at least with the other 50 issue, I was like, oh, okay, well, you know, like at least it's kind of like, you know, in the scheme of a book I'm going to buy anyway. Yeah, I don't know.
There's something I respect about the Web of Spider-Man book for just being so nakedly an advertisement for other books.
Yeah, I guess so. Whatever. But it's got a great cover anyway. But you're gonna have to explain this Paul backup to me, man, because like this like I've read this like a couple of times now, and I'm still like, what is happening here? Like, I need the Dan, you know, conspiracy board or whatever. Like, because this story did not work for me. I got to be honest with you. I was just like, oh god, no more of Paul and Wyatt and Rabin. Like, I want to be over with these guys. Can they just die on their way back to their home planet, please? I mean, can we just figure this out?
Yes, as much as I agree with that sentiment, like, I do not understand the inclusion of Paul, while I'm also not like entirely against the idea of Mary Jane being with someone else and Peter's reaction to that. It's just a story that has been far underserved. I think this story adds like nice context to that character, but it's way too late to make me really care about this and think that it's something that's going to stand the test of time in the history of Spider-Man. But I did like this little story and how it kind of answers a bunch of questions that I had about Paul, if only just to tie up loose ends, which has been the ongoing theme. Like, early on in this run, Paul showed up, outside of Peter's apartment and paid off the debt collector, who ended up being a serial killer that turned into a demon, if you remember that nonsense.
Like you do.
Yes, of course. But where was he getting that money? If Paul is truly a guy from another universe, like how is he more well off than Peter, a guy who is actually from this universe and has a birth certificate, And this story goes about answering some of that. So I understand the confusion behind this story. I think it is a little confusingly written, and I have my own complaints about it. But the basic idea is this. Paul, working for his dad in a science facility, they are tapping into the symbology, baby, and Paul wants to use it to make money. But his dad is losing his mind and is experimenting with symbology in a way that we would ultimately come to find out is quite dangerous. And Paul, rather than kind of dealing with it himself, hires other people to manage his father. And Paul, we see, is really in it for the money. Like, that's his real intention here. And he's willing to kind of look the other way and let other people deal with his father's problems, so long as he can make money off of whatever his father's experiments are. But that backfires horribly when his father truly goes off the deep end and murders a guy named Cale, one of the managers that is supposed to be managing him. And this is what kind of drives Paul away from his father and kicks off all of the YEP business that we saw in Brand New Day and in this run. So Paul, going back to the end of Dead Languages, there's this scene that's been roundly criticized by the same people on the internet about how Paul is, just like Peter. He, Mary Jane sees in him a kindred soul with Peter, someone who learned a hard lesson about responsibility. And we kind of learn what that is, because Paul, what we find out in this story is he's using the money from the company that he was working in another universe. So we don't know if this is where I get confused a little bit. He's using that money to basically go to the people that were harmed by his father and that Paul wronged in his original universe, to help them out with their problems. So the Cale in Paul's original universe mentions having a health problem. So in the 616, Paul helps him get medical treatment. The thing that's confusing about it for me is that the Cale we meet in the 616 also seemed to work for Paul's father in a company and doesn't know Paul or doesn't recognize him with the beard. And so, was Wyatt Rabin also in the 616 universe too? That's where I get confused. But at the very least, the core idea of it is that Paul is making amends with alternate dimension versions of the people that he wronged from his now dead universe. that like as a result of his father, and it's meant to draw a parallel with Peter, who was being greedy, was only looking out for himself and its bottom line, and it caused untold death, and is now making up for it. And Paul, as well, is going on a similar journey. Does that clear it up at all for you, Mark?
I mean, it clears it up in that it's an explanation, but
okay,
it's quite a mouthful. Is the bottom line. So
yeah,
but congratulations for reading comprehension being a skill of yours. I appreciate that.
I mean, like, I got this story. It's only upon like reread that I was like, well, wait a minute. Like, are there two Rabines? Are there like who was Kale in our universe? Is he, because he mentions that's where I got confused. And I don't think we're ever going to get an answer to it, but at the very least, like, it kind of like makes more sense out of Paul as what he's doing. Not that he's an interesting character necessarily, but like, I get who this guy is now a little bit more. And the story I thought was fine. But again, not because I don't want MJ to date anybody else, only because Paul was so thoroughly uninteresting, would be fine with him going to the dustbin of history now that these I's have been dotted and T's have been crossed.
There you go. You sound like such an insult, Dan. I know. All right. Well, anything about the Lee Gatlin comic that you wanted to throw out there?
I thought it was just as charming as all of his are. I mean, like, if there was ever a time for a guy to get a Spider-Man newspaper strip, now that newspaper strips are dead as a format, right. Like, Lee Gatlin would be the guy. Like, these are very charming and play off your knowledge of Spider-Man, and are exactly something that I enjoy reading a page or two of. And thinking that was clever and cute, and I love his style. Like, the artwork is so fun, and his Twitter profile is a fun one to follow because he posts redesigns of characters constantly, and they're very pleasant to look at. I'm more tickled to talk about this cover gallery because I just flipped past this because I was like, they are printing pages. But apparently Mark, for all of his making fun of me about continuity, scours these cover galleries to note for mistakes.
It's absolutely. I don't read letters pages, but I look at cover galleries with a fine-tooth comb. Apparently, I mean, in all honesty, 99% of the time in an issue in a comic like this, I do just kind of breeze through it very quickly. But I don't know why I stopped on the page that had renew your vows on it, because I was kind of taken by, wait, why is renew your vows posted immediately after Superior? It was the preface to Amazing Spider-Man #4, because that was the whole thing. They were on Battle World. They came back, what was it, 6 months later, and then all of a sudden it was Parker Industries, and that is not how they sequenced it. And I just was just like, this is crazy to me, because like, one would think, and now I kind of guess, do I need to go back and look at other cover galleries? Because like, wouldn't they just like print what they've already done and just add the next 50? Like, are they like relaying this out every time? I mean, like, if they do, I mean, like, talk about a waste of time. I mean,
some intern had his week taken up,
Yeah, right.
Yeah. I just love that you spotted that, because like, I guarantee you the editors did what I did, which is like, yeah, another cover gallery, fine, flip through it, like,
yeah. Looks good, initial NL, looks good. Great issue, guys. Woohoo! No mistakes.
No mistakes. All right. Well, Mark, what are you giving this issue?
You had to ask me first, because I feel like I'm gonna set a weird. It's a B for me, Dan. It's a high B. Like, I'm tempted to go B plus, but like I said, there was just some things about the meta text. There were some things about like just the whole courtroom twist where it's just like I'm not ready to submit to the quality. If this comic, if this was the first issue of this run, I would be probably a grade or two higher. With that said, I'm here. I'm not ready to get hurt again, Dan. I'm protecting myself, so B for me.
I'm giving this one. I think earlier in the week I would have given it a solid A. I just really had a great time reading it, and
Right.
I think I've cooled because mostly because I think a lot of the stuff I love about this is stuff I kind of expect from a standard issue of Spider-Man. Right. I do think it's better than the average standard issue of old Spider-Man comics where it was doing the stuff all the time. I don't think that those stories were interested in doing thematic callbacks all the time or character growth necessarily, in a way that we've kind of I think JMS has kind of got us used to looking for in right. our Spider-Man comics. If there was character growth, it might be within a single issue, but nobody was doing the kind of thing that I think you and I have come to expect necessarily out of this book. So I think this book has a lot of really things that are elevated about it beyond even a random issue of a Roger Stern run of this book. Say what you will about Stern's thing, the Hobgoblin was really the major through line there, not necessarily how is Peter's life changing right. in that way. So that this book even attempts to do that, I think, is a step above average, and I would put it up there with some of the better JRJR JMS issues. Maybe not on the level of the Conversation or Coming Home, but certainly I felt like this was a really solid chapter in Spider-Man story. So I'm giving this an A-. I think I would give it an A+ if I felt I alluded to some of the kind of character arcs here. This feels like the end of a character arc that I don't think they did all the work to, and it picks up a lot of that slack, but I have to factor in where this falls in the run, like you said, into my grade, and that's what gets it an A- for me. But boy, did I have a great time reading it.
Great. Well, I hope we continue having a great time and that I allow myself to completely submit to the story. Because like I said, there was a lot to like here. I just was, like I said, there was just some things that left me a little cautioned as we do this. So
I really think if Zeb Wells can end this with a really solid story, it will do a lot to make people think fondly on major parts of the run. There's just enough good stuff in this run that I think a really solid story that put a stamp on it. I'm not saying it's going to redeem it, but right. I do think there was enough talent here to see why this guy got this book, and I want him to finish it.
All right. Well, speaking of finishing, Dan, it's that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, this podcast exists because of listener support on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews the same weeks the comics release, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses. I mean, the way that comics cost, even our 2 or 3 lowest tiers are going to be less than the price of a single comic book. So go check out our Patreon if you want to help support our show. So thank you to everybody who already supports us and the work that we do.
Dan and I really want to increase all of the awesome work we do in the second half of 2024. Well, really the last quarter of 2024. So if you're already a patron or want to become one, please help us meet our goals and make this a better podcast by considering supporting our show. Just go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and click on the big Patreon button to get started.
So Mark, until both our children turn state witness against us, what's our motto?
With great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk. And you can't handle the truth.